Hey everybody, welcome today. Thanks for waiting as we got everything started here. My name is Cheryl. I'm a content manager at Zenfolio, and I've got my teammate Amanda, who's going to be helping moderate the chat and answer any questions. And I'm really excited to present our guest today, Rachel Brenke. Rachel's a multifaceted entrepreneur and a lawyer, and actually a triathlete, which is pretty exciting. Aside from her extensive career, Rachel is also a military spouse and a mother of 5. I've got 3, and so, my goodness, way to go with all that on your plate. She created Brenke Brands, which includes Fit Legally, TheLawTog, and she's also the author of 7 books. She hosts the Real Biz podcasts and founded a boutique niche law firm. Rachel, where do you find the time? She's also been able to live her dream and travel the world with her family while building this successful empire. So welcome, Rachel. I'm really excited. This is a passion topic of mine. As a professional photographer, I know a lot of people are afraid of contracts because they think they're going to scare people away. And I have found that the absolute opposite is true. I hate surprises, and contracts really help prevent some of those. So welcome and thanks for joining us. I'm going to minimize my camera so we can focus on Rachel, if I can figure it out.
You guys can all see me right now, right? I saw
Absolutely.
the comments dropping of where everyone's coming from. And I always love to see that because it's really cool to see like how big the reach is and where everyone is. It's really great to meet you all. I am going to have slides. I understand this topic. Legal is not that fun. So you notice in the bio, I don't lead with lawyer because when you lead with lawyer, people like think the worst and the stereotypes. I really will try to make it fun. When I get excited or passionate, as I am about this subject, especially for photographers, I have a tendency to talk quicker. So I apologize. Just if you need me to repeat something, feel free to ask questions. I'm going to stop at different segments so that you can ask questions and then we can go from there. So I'm going to go ahead and share screen to get the slides going. You see that? I think we're good to go on there. All right, so how do I get this full screen? Cool. I think you guys can still see me as well. Yeah, so legally protecting your business is one of the subject matters that is why I got into creating TheLawTog. I was actually a photographer before I was a lawyer, did photography all through law school, and it is a subject that is so incredibly important to me, and I've carried that over into being a lawyer and in my own practice and in my own businesses because I don't want to spend the time on cleaning up problems. I don't want to spend the time on dealing with issues, and I definitely don't want to have to pay someone to clean up messes for me. So I really want to take a proactive approach, and especially I want to pull in some pieces about, the onslaught and the accessibility of being able to use AI in our businesses, because that's bringing a different level for us to have to get our head around to make sure that we're protecting ourselves, our clients, data, our photography or video, all of our creative assets as well. Before I jump, they've already done the intro for me. Before I jump in, though, I do want to give my little fine print disclaimer. I am a lawyer, but I'm not your lawyer. I'm licensed in multiple states in the U.S., and my law firm actually serves internationally. However, for the purposes of this presentation, of course, as a lawyer, I have to give this. This isn't creating an attorney-client relationship. This is just general legal information, business advice you will get as well, since I am an MBA and business coach. Did that prior to also becoming a lawyer and prior to being a photographer. And so any information you have here, though, do not hesitate to reach out if you have any questions after this. Myself and the team will be happy to help you find the resources. We also have the TheLawTog Facebook group. but don't rely solely on everything I say here. I'm going to speak generally because I'm not looking at your specific circumstances, and I can't even do that. So if you put like a really in-depth fact pattern in the Q&A, it's going to be very difficult to slice through that. Just understand that this is going to be a bit more general. It's going to equip you with the knowledge and power to be able to move forward and feeling confident in the steps that you need to take for your photography business. If you know me at all, you know that I am a big proponent of contracts. That's just one piece of the tools that we have available to us as photographers to be protected. And what does that mean? That protection is a couple different things. We can protect ourselves. We can protect our personal assets, our business assets. We can protect our intellectual property, which would be our photographs or videos, or really any content that you create. But it's also protecting the relationship that you're going to have with your client. And as you see, like, contracts are so multi-tool. It's like the Swiss Army knife almost of all these legal protections. But I feel like oftentimes, and there are some educators in the industry, this is not a bash, just highlighting, that will preach they don't want to use contracts. But that's because there's this misnomer that it has to be just one physical printed document or online signing document. As a lawyer, I much prefer that if you ever have a problem, so that everything is in one central place. But even with educators, or maybe some of you that are not using formal contracts, you are still creating contracts. You just don't realize it. Contract doesn't just have to be one piece of paper, right? And the most common ones, as you see on the screen, we use them everywhere. In fact, when you guys were all probably signing up to come to this class, you agreed to the privacy policy and the website terms of the host of the class. If you're streaming this somewhere, if it's loaded on YouTube, you're going to be agreeing to those. There's contracts everywhere. So I just really want to get it out of your head that they don't have to be this crazy tool that's like a big old scroll with hieroglyphics written in lamb's blood carried by a carrier pigeon, right? And that's where oftentimes, and I joke, but because law and legal seems so archaic sometimes, especially when it comes to contracts, in the landscape of the amount of technology that we have now, just understand it's everywhere. The device that you are watching this on, you had to agree to what's called a EULA, end user license agreement, to utilize that product or the system that you're on. So we're covered in contracts everywhere. So why do so many not want to use formalized ones in photography? And I'm going to try to kind of pick that apart for you. And as you can see on the screen right here, these are the most common basic ones that I recommend for photographers to use. Typically, when we hear the term photography contract, people are referring to the very first bullet point, services contract, right? And this is the one that's between you, the photographer, and the client, that is going to basically govern the entire relationship that you have with the client. What's so important about this is that if it's properly drafted, not just legally enforceable, but properly drafted. And what I mean by that, and remember I mentioned I like to bring real world application into the use of these legal tools. Having a services contract is not only going to create the legal relationship for you, but it's also going to build the buyer's confidence in your client, right? Because the more information that you give without overwhelm, the more clarity that they have, the less potential for miscommunication, then they are going to feel more comfortable in you as the professional. And I will tell you, I mean, I don't have the specific numbers, it's just a colloquial percentage. I would say 90 to 95% of the problems that come through when it's in a services-based relationship often is around lack of communication. Very few times do I really see that somebody, especially the business owner, you, the photographer, is actually going to intentionally breach an agreement or intentionally not fulfill something. Oftentimes it's more so that's the perception that the client may have and not necessarily the truth of what happened. And that's where a contract can be a really good way for you all to have to stay out of the TheLawTog group, although I like having you there, stay out of my inbox or stay out of my law firm and us having meetings and having to pay for it, is by pointing to having this one main services contract that's going to create the whole relationship. Another thing that I love about having, if it's drafted in a specific way, and contract drafting really is an art form, whether you realize it or not, because it's a balance. You can't be too imbalanced one direction, but you don't want it to be so much so that it's equally balanced that you're giving up protections, but then you add in the element of it has to be enforceable. You want to build that buyer's confidence, but I take it even a step further. I want to ensure that the contract is also going to do a couple of things for me. It is going to be a customer service tool. So for example, you may write in there if you have a payment structure, maybe a client misses a payment due to death in the family. I want to be able to write in some safeguards that allow you, the photographer, the other party to the contract, very specifically services one, to be able to say, you know what, client, I'm so sorry your dad died. I'm happy to allow you to not have to pay the payment right now, not have to pay the late fee. You can just wait a week or two. You guys agree on another date. But by having it properly written by a lawyer is key, right? But have it also properly written by someone that knows how to actually use these contracts in the real world, you can be comfortable in going out there and being able to waive that without waiving all other breaches, right? So because the client didn't meet that payment cycle, by you saying, no, that's okay, what if the client turns around and just decides to push later? We want to make sure, and this is where I come in, I write language that allows for you to waive that one breach, the father dying, letting her pay at another date, without waiving all other breaches, so that you can have everything else be enforceable to you. Now, not only is it content, but it's also the way that it's laid out. And for me, this is something that I'm very much like a comfort-driven human being. And if you read any books, look at the book Influence, the Power of Persuasion. Then they had The Power of Persuasion. It's by Dr. Cialdini. It's basically, I would call it like my guidebook. That's the handbook. I've read it so many times. I love it. It talks about building buyers' confidence. And I have actually taken a lot of the lessons out of there. It's actually more for sales and customer service, but in marketing, but taking it out of there and putting it into how you use your contracts. The way I draft them, I'm already doing that heavy lifting for you. Now, that's not just a plug for me, but I share all this information to say having someone in the photography industry that knows exactly what's going to happen when you deliver a contract, having it drafted properly is going to reduce a lot of problems for you, make you more confident, and just make it so you'll have a better relationship with your client in the end. You don't have to come to me. There are other lawyers out there, but these are kind of the things that I want you to look for, because these are ways that not only can the contract be enforceable, but it really integrates into the relationship that you have with your client seamlessly, which is what we want to do. All right. So I give a lot of examples on the services contract. It can be applied to all these other ones like you see on the screen. You see bullet number 4, model release. Many of us know about that as well. That's the document where the client, their publicity rights, their likeness, the recognizability of them, they get to control that. And so they are giving permission for you to utilize their face in marketing, your marketing. And that's where the model release comes in. And then 2 other big ones a lot of people don't think about are the privacy policy and website terms. If you all don't have one, please get one. Please don't use the standard stock ones if you're hosting on Wix, and I'm not calling them out specifically, just an example. I haven't looked at theirs lately, but don't depend on theirs, because theirs are between them and the users, not between you and your website visitors or the people that you're gathering consumer data from, such as, you know, contact form, name, phone number, address, maybe email address for sure. That's where your privacy policy, and it is required in some states to have that, and very incredibly important. And then of course, disclaimers and disclosures are also another example of contracts, whether you realize it or not, having this on your website and marketing. You know, very specifically, we see this with in newborn photography, when people are utilizing editing, when you like have the hanging baby or something like that, it's always good to have a disclaimer of how it was created, etc. We're also seeing that now with AI. If you're using AI, you're having a disclosure that you're going to be utilizing AI in editing. Why? Because your client's likeness is going to be uploaded, and it is a consumer data, and I use air quotes because that's not legally defined, but it is. You do not want to subject and automatically unilaterally decide for your clients to upload their face into these AI systems, and then it's pushed out there. Why? For the same reason that I highly suggest that model releases are allowed to be declined, so you don't use those photos in marketing, because we don't want, if there's someone that may be a foster child, it is someone has a sensitive job, they work for a 3-letter agency, FBI, DIA, DEA, CIA, and they're not able to have an online presence. You don't want to put their safety or their employment in any sort of what's the word I'm looking for, compromise. And what if we have someone that is a victim of domestic violence, abuse, etc., and all of a sudden it's out there. So just think about these things when it comes to utilizing contracts. They're here to set the expectations of the clients, create customer service tools, reduce miscommunication, and be there as a legal backbone for you, because it's a legal backbone for you. I'm sorry, is legal recreated relationship, and then also a backbone that if you feel, especially as creative, sometimes we don't feel like we can say no, or we have a client that pushes and pushes and pushes, and you may not want to have confrontation. Point to the contract as the no man, right? Point to the contract as the one that's going to set the tone. So the bottom line is, no matter if it's the services contract, if it's disclosures on your website, it's a privacy policy, it is an agreement between your business and another party regarding a very specific action. And that's really all it boils down to. And like I mentioned at the top of this slide, verbally, not written, that they're everywhere. You log on to YouTube, it's there. You're using Instagram, you're agreeing to it. So why is it so different for us as photographers? Why would we not utilize them? And even if you're not utilizing a structured written contract, be mindful, you may still be entering into contracts. They're just in unspecified terms. They're not going to help you if you do end up having a dispute.
Rachel, I might be jumping ahead here,
Yeah.
but at what point do you find that photographers should be presenting contracts? Is it right before somebody agrees to a session with you, after they agree? Like, where's the best time to present these to them?
That's a really good question. And primarily what you're going to be proposing then is going to be a services contract and your model release, more than likely. Sometimes you can wait for the model release after the session, especially if it's a sensitive session. They're going to, like maternity boudoir, et cetera, they may want to look at it and approve which photos are going to go online. But realistically, in the timeline of your workflow, once they submit an inquiry to you, the photographer, you're going to go over it. You decide you want to work together. Maybe you have had a consultation already. Maybe you get on the phone or you just email back and forth. Once the client is like, all right, I'm ready to do this, that is when I think the contract should be delivered. Because if you try to do it after the session, you're going to be, you've lost a lot of buyer's confidence, because the services contract should be written in a way that it is, it's in chronological order from the basically inception of the relationship all the way through the end. So that's another buyer's confidence, building confidence aspect to it. So if you deliver the contract after the session, you're missing out on that key piece of building the confidence, but you're also not really setting the expectations. You're going to find if you don't get the contract signed before, you don't know if they're going to show up at the session date. You may reserve the date. They're not contractually bound at that point to those terms, right? You may require that they have to pay you a certain amount. And if they don't, then the contract's not enforceable. The contract's not valid. But if you're not getting that done until after the fact, you're not able to control it. So yeah, the timeline for me is inquiry, talk a little bit to see if you guys are going to be a decent fit. And then when you both are ready to move forward, that's when you want to get at least the services contract signed in the timeline.
And aside from a model release, is it a major red flag if somebody says, I don't want to sign this?
Yes. Well, no. Okay. Hold on. My light just went out. Give me 1 second. Let me fix that real quick. This is a hot topic that we get in the TheLawTog a lot. Oftentimes a client will ask a question, and so a photographer will come to the TheLawTog and go, oh my God, the client's asking us about my contract. Are they saying they don't want to sign my contract? What's the issue? And you'll get like 300 comments of the red flag emoji. And I always want to say, guys, and I do say sometimes if I see it, pump the brakes. Because we have to remember that while contracts are everywhere around us, sometimes the clients that you have may have never been into a professional service type relationship like this before, and it could just be an unknown. So you look at what the content, is it just a straight up, I don't want to sign this at all? Well, you as a business owner, you're not legally required to have a contract, but as a lawyer, I highly, highly, highly would suggest that you have one. Just keep it in mind. It's up to you at the end of the day if you want to take the risk of not having the client sign the contract. And I will tell you, go through the TheLawTog Facebook group. It's got years worth of content, and almost all the ones that have the majority of issues they start out with, never thought I would have to ask this, and no, I didn't have a contract. Yes, I've learned my lesson. And so if that's not enough evidence, you don't have to take it from me, take it from the other photographers as well. As far as content though, so let's say a client has very specific questions about the certain clauses, the content in your contract, that's where I'm like, all right, let's pump the brakes and let's see, what are they really asking about? Is it maybe because there is a privacy reason they can't be in a model release? Or, I mean, in the photos, so they don't want to sign or they want to modify the model release? Or is it they really want to hire you, but they're not able to submit to that payment schedule? Maybe there is a compromise. So it's one of those, it depends type of responses. You need to start with, okay, what is the client asking? What is their intention? And then, but still, again, at the end of the day, you as the photographer, you as the business owner, have to make the decision whether you're willing to negotiate, whether you're willing to change. And I personally believe that oftentimes that red flag emoji is put down, or photographers don't want to change their contract. It's just because it's a foreign tool still for us, right? As a creative, it's still a foreign tool, even if your lawyer drafts it really well and explains it to you. And you're like, oh, how do I respond to this? How do I negotiate that? And so I would encourage like picking apart that angst about the foreignness of a contract away from not imparting that on the client, if that makes sense, and really hearing what the client's asking.
Great. Thanks for answering that. That's very thorough and very helpful.
Yeah, a little long-winded if you can't tell. Any more questions on that? I don't think so. Okay, so forgot I had this other slide. It talks about, I already went through all these
Actually,
pieces.
we do have.
The one thing that I did not mention before, so I'm glad we have this slide, is that insurance, your liability insurance may ask if you had a contract in place and what that looks like, especially if it comes to injury or destruction of property or equipment. So just keep that in mind. Having a contract in place can help you navigate any sort of insurance claim that you may have.
We did get another question in. Candy wants to know, do I need a formalized contract between me and my subcontractors or second shooter?
Yes, good question. Yeah, because why? By default, when you are having a subcontractor or an assistant, maybe they're in your office helping you create content, or you're having this photographer be a second shooter for you at a wedding, by default, they're 1099 contractors, right? Well, one of the benefits of being a contractor is that you retain copyright and intellectual property protections in the work that you create. So if you are the primary photographer, you have a second shooter as a 1099 contractor, and that's the key classification. They're a 1099 contractor, absent them being a W-2 employee of your company or a written contract that signs over the photographs. Technically, that second shooter retains ownership of the copyright, which means what? They could stop you, the primary, from using the photos at all. They can go and distribute, use it however they want. My suggestion is in situations like that, have a contract. This is just one example, but like have a contract that very specifically outlines the intellectual property transfer to you, the primary, the owner. You can license them back a usage to the second shooter for the use in their marketing. That's pretty standard in the industry. Again, you can change it. You don't have to do it that way. I just find a lot of problems when people don't go with this method. And for all the other reasons that you would want to have a contract, right? Like you have a contract with your client, you want to know when you're going to get paid, how you're going to get paid, what you're going to deliver, what the other party's going to do. So it is a good protection tool for the two of you, just to, again, all the same reasons I said for between you and your client. Have you and your subcontractors should also have.
Yeah, imagine with a second shooter, especially an event like a wedding, that those contracts are really important to understand everybody's responsibilities and ownership and timelines. I've never shot a wedding, and that's probably why. That's a lot to consider.
It is. And the example I gave of not having a contract in place or having a contract that doesn't have the copyright transfer language in it. I have represented one of you. I don't know if they're actually on here when I say you in the TheLawTog audience in the industry. A photographer came to me, was a primary photographer, did not have that contract. And she had sold to the couple a package. Well, she was supposed to go do like additional sales of prints, products, whatever, but the clients never got back to her. She's like, well, that's suspect. Come to find out, the second shooter had gone around her And while it feels icky, it's not necessarily illegal for her to do that. The second shooter went around the primary and was able to sell physical products to the couple. And legally, because of the way the lines of the intellectual property worked out and there was no contract, legally it has an ick factor a little bit for us, but there wasn't much legal recourse you could do at that point.
Yeah, I hope everybody on here learns from that example and never has to go through that. Wow.
Yeah. No, and and it's so funny. It's like, I even get surprised sometimes. I've been doing this for so long, and I'll have someone, one of y'all will come into the firm and we get on a call and I'm like, why do people act like that? Like, it's just so, but again, it could just be a situation. Sometimes that second shooter may have not thought anything wrong of it, right? Especially since there may not have been a conversation, your contract can be the talking mouth for you. Let me see. And yeah, why should you have one? Not just because you read it in a group, not because your mom told you to, and not just because I have told you to, but just look around. I mean, just talk to other people in the industry and you'll see that how many issues can arise without having one. And I know this sounds like I'm kind of, hammering on that a bit, but because if you come to me, you'll see it all the time in the group. You'll ask a question. I'll say, what's your contract say? Because that's the foundation. That's the core of the relationship that you have with your clients, that we need to know what are the rules of the game, right? We're stepping onto the Hunger Games battlefield. What are the rules that we need to play within? What were the restrictions, the confines? And without that, it's going to cost you more time and money. And this is one thing I'm going to get sketchy. I told you I get passionate, so I talk fast. This is one thing that really does hurt my heart when y'all have an issue with one of your clients or something and you come to the firm, and I know this is your livelihood. I've been there and I get it, and I love you guys for it. I know you love the photography and the client work that you do, but not putting in place things like a contract, and we can talk about copyright at a separate time, but taking the measures for protection of copyright, in the end, we end up having to have a twofold conversation. One, what is the legal claims that you have here, right? And if you don't have a contract, it's going to take you even more time and money to figure out what the claims are and put all this. At that point, instead of giving me a fully done puzzle with just a few pieces missing, you're handing me a box with a bunch of pieces that I would then have to put together. So more time and money. So that's first fold. But then second fold, we have to look at this from a real world perspective, right? And the more that you do not engage and use the legal tools readily available to you, not only is it the time and money, but then you're getting into this second part of the conversation where we have to talk about, is this even financially worth pursuing? Just because you have a good legal claim doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be worth your time, money, and energy, right? And so we're not just, and many lawyers that you talk to, especially litigators, you could walk in the door to them and say, do I have a claim? They're going to sign you up for a lawsuit right then. You're going to be tens of thousands of dollars down the road, and then you're going to be walking out of the courtroom, and who's the only people that win in those circumstances typically? Lawyers. And so I'm a really crappy salesperson. I will tell each and every one of you when you come in, here's your legal claim. This is what I think the damages to be, but I'm going to be real with you. This is what it's going to cost you in order to solve this problem. And oftentimes, by not having a good solid contract, and I'll give one last example and then we'll move on, but not having a good solidly drafted contract, your majority of them end up having to walk away or just sending one last letter of demand or something, and they don't really get to fully pursue the legal claim, even though it is available there to them. Most notably, this is the one I see a lot of, talking about having a properly drafted contract. It's not just putting words on a paper. We talked about balance. We talked about the art of that. We're building the buyer's confidence, but there are other sections in there that are incredibly important. And I can always tell when someone DIYs a contract when I go straight to the legal miscellany section. This is where we're going to look at things like if there is attorney's fees provision, which is the example I'm going to give in a second. Where is this going to be resolved? How is a dispute going to be resolved, et cetera, et cetera. And I see it time and time and time again, that someone will come in the door, they have a legal claim, and I'm like, all right, we can go to court, but you don't have attorney's fees in here. But they're like, but what if I win? Well, guess what? Unless there's some claim in statute outside, and typically breach of contract cases, you've really got primarily just breach of contract. Unless I can find something else, if you don't have that prevailing party attorney's fees provision in there, even if you, the photographer, all in the right, your client's a little cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs, is taking you to court, we get to the end and you win, you're still out the attorney's fees. So that's what I'm talking about. Like, we do the math on, If you had just gone for having a contract that had the attorney's fees, you can feel confident that in the end, generally, they're going to get your attorney's fees paid by the losing party. But if you don't have that at all, we don't have a chance. And the puck basically stops with us in our conversation when we start doing that ROI. I'll get off my soapbox about that, but I get passionate because I hear the heartbreak, I hear the frustration of many photographers, and they're like, I wish I had known. And I'm like, and that's why I'm here today talking to you guys about that, just to make sure you have
attorney's fee. That's something I learned something new today, that I feel like contracts in themselves, when somebody has a disagreement, even if you do have a flawed contract, which I'm not suggesting you do, but you say you did sign that, and that right there has some weight to it, unless they're really litigious or very stubborn. But yeah, to have all the right components, then you're really in a good position when somebody breaches contract.
And I'll give another real world example. Actually, right before I got on here, I had sent off a demand letter on behalf of a photographer. All of a sudden we get a screaming call at the firm. It's the client. And then they emailed me, and I was able to very succinctly say, see section 4 of the contract, reattach their contract and send it back. So that cost my client basically nothing. Whereas if I had to go through, create an argument, etc., then it's like what you just said. I was able to basically say to their client, well, you signed it, here's the terms. And I didn't have to write this whole letter that would take multiple hours, hundreds of dollars to the client to have to pay, my client to have to pay. Okay. Any more questions, I think, on that contract? Oh, there. So that's just really I kind of skipped around a little bit on that. Are they legally required? Again, I kind of dropped this in earlier. I don't know of anything. There's no contract police out there. In fact, I'll put a little ringer in here for you. There is no legal requirement that any of us become an LLC or a corporation either. It's just something that I highly recommend. And it's not on the screen, but I want to pause here real quick. When I'm looking at the top 3 tools that I recommend for any business owner, actually, and in fact, I don't think I just came back from a business networking event this morning, and I took a checklist instead of a business card to hand out. And I was looking at it while I was waiting for the meeting to start, and it's almost the exact same one that I have for photographers. And it applied to almost every industry that was in the room. And the top 3 things that I look at are for liability protection to protect you all, contracts. We already mentioned insurance, and then also having that entity. But there's no legal requirement. There's no contract police, entity police, insurance police that are going to come around and say, why don't you have all of these or any of these, right? So yes, there are no contract police out there. However, we've already gone over all the reasons of why to have it. To me, in business, it's a non-negotiable. I mean, that would be my choice. That would be my recommendation. But also, like we mentioned, insurance may also require and or prefer, if you have them, for coverage. Excuse me. So what makes a contract legal? Remember earlier I mentioned how, there's probably many of you that don't use formal contracts, and I'm not shaming on that, but I ended up saying it, you're probably still entering into a contract just because it's not a 4 corners document, right? It's not, I say 4 corners, physical paper, could be on screen. Digital contracts, the way to go. We'll talk about that. But elements of a contract, you really just need offer, acceptance, an exchange for something, the capacity to enter into it, and it be a legal activity. So what does that look like? You might, if you're not using formal contracts right now, client inquires. You say, yeah, sure, I can take your session. I can take your photographs. Here's the session details. That's an offer. Client emails back and says, great, I'll see you on March 15th at 5 p.m. That's acceptance. You show up at the session and client hands you the $500. There's the consideration. You then deliver the photos after the session. That's the consideration complete. Assuming you guys are all both adults that have the capacity to enter into the contract. And obviously photography, it's a legal activity. You didn't actually execute a formal document, but you created a contract. Now, would I say it's a shoddy, vague contract? Yeah, because if a problem ever happens, more than likely you're not putting legal miscellany in the footer of your contract of your email. You're not having all the specifics. It's very bare bones basic. And I will tell you right now, and I test this all the time. And I actually taught this. I did a class at Harvard Business School a couple months ago on AI. And I always get asked when I go to these business networking events and stuff, people say, Rachel, aren't you worried that you're going to become obsolete? Lawyers are going to become obsolete because of AI and Chat GPT? And I say, no, why? And they're like, well, because I hopped on ChatGPT today and created an operating agreement. I was like, well, good for you. But do you know trash in, trash out? And they're like, what? I'm like, the output's only as good as the input. And so you go and ask ChatGPT to create you a contract. You're only going to get the bare bones. It's not going to be any much more unless you know how to prompt it. It's not going to give you any more than what you're already doing through email and verbal and by action right now. All you have to do is really bare bones meet the elements that you guys see on the screen. And the reason I bring that up is so not all is lost if you don't have a written contract. So if you ever seen the TheLawTog group where you come to me and I say, well, what does your contract say? And I always get the shy eyes, the shuffle feet. Don't judge me, Rachel. I won't judge you. I'll just help try to fix you for the future. But the reason I'm asking is because then I have to go back to the puzzle analogy. So if you handed me a puzzle with a few pieces missing that's already complete, I'm being handed a box of puzzle pieces that we have to portion through. So it doesn't mean all of it's lost if you're not using formal contracts, just highly suggest. So here, does it have to be in writing? We've already been over that. Lawyer drafted, I explained that as well. Highly, highly suggest. At a minimum, again, you don't have to come to me for any of this. I just want you all to get protected. And I say this all the time, in speaking, in groups, everything. You don't have to come to the TheLawTog. In fact, I have encouraged people, take our product descriptions if you want to a local attorney. But again, it's like what the example I just gave with AI. Trash in is trash out, right? If you don't give them quality information and they don't have the requisite knowledge to give you a good output, then it's really, you may end up in a worse position. I'm going to get on another soapbox here. There are some online contract signing systems in the photography industry right now that offer free services contracts. And I've had to litigate a few, which has cost the clients a lot of money. And it has basically, they need improvement. So I say all that to say, go to a lawyer. You can take one of the free ones. You can take my product description. You can take the things we talked about here. But again, you need to find someone. A lawyer's not just a lawyer, right? You don't want to go to, oh, my Uncle Bob did real estate. I'm going to have him write it. Would you maybe better off than if you wrote it on your own? Sure. But here's the key things I don't want you to look for hiring somebody. Do they know contracts, right? Are they actually a business attorney that does contracts? Because it's not just writing. When I'm writing it, I'm always anticipating how would I have to litigate this? Because and it's the same thing as like when I'm doing partnership agreements. I think about the divorce at the end, right? Because there's going to be a split at some day. Either someone's going to die, someone's going to become incapacitated, or they're going to divorce in the business, not legally like marital divorce, but business divorce. So as I'm writing, I'm always thinking the end in mind. So we want to make sure here that we're going to a lawyer that you don't necessarily have to be a litigator, because I don't hold myself out as one anymore. I will litigate for the clients that I do have. But you want to make sure they understand business, contracts, photography industry, and intellectual property at a minimum. Those are the 4 key things. Does it have to be notarized? No, this is an old misnomer. In fact, does it have to be signed? Well, of course. And I highly suggest using digital contracts. So many online systems. We have e-sign act and other legal mechanisms to back up for us that we can have. Digital contracts can be digitally signed and they're just as enforceable. Now that's for this, right? I'm speaking specific to photography. There are things like when you're buying a house, et cetera, that need to be notarized that may have to have wet ink signature. There are still some courts that require wet ink signature, even though we are in the year 2024 and just came out of a worldwide pandemic. My local court is that way. I can't fax it. I literally have to run down there and give them a wet ink signed document. It's crazy. But for us, for photography contracts, we don't have to worry about that. I've given you kind of the rules that we have to stay within. So the ultimate situation here, lawyer drafted written contract, signed prior to rendering services and product delivery. So I did the slash between the two kind of for the reasons that I mentioned earlier when you asked about the timeline. Services contract should be the kickoff of the relationship. And I honestly say all the time, and I did this when I was full-time photography, I never put any inquiry, any potential client on my calendar, and I actually do this still in my law firm. I don't put any new client on my calendar without a signed services contract. Doesn't have to be the model release like we talked about, and the payment. Whatever, either it's in full, half, the initial payment, whatever that looks like. So I need to have signature, execution, and payment exchange. Then of course we want everyone to fulfill all their duties on both sides and everyone to be happy. And I will say the majority of situations out there, hopefully you're not going to get the crazies. Hopefully you're going to be able to have good tools such as contracts. You're going to be able to explain yourself. You're not going to run into issues. But contracts don't just have to be there for the big things. It can be the little things as well. Take, for example, I work on the rules of three. If there's something incredibly important that I want a client to remember, I did this in photography as well. I remind them at least 3 times. So what is the one question we always get at the very end of a portrait session? Well, when are my photos going to be ready? Well, guess what? I've already told them once in the services contract that they executed. Did they really read it? I don't know. They're grown adults. You would hope they did, but that's once. The one good way to wrap up the end of the session was always, hey, I think we got everything we wanted. Is there anything additional? If not, these will be ready in 15 days, blah, 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 blah. That's twice. Then when I get to my car, you can also automate this to the different systems that are out there. Send another email. Hey, Susie and little Timmy, it was so great to take your photos. Just a reminder, they'll be ready in 2 weeks. And that can be all templated and ready to go. Now, most of what I just said is not legal advice, but it can help if there's ever a problem. If Susie decides to get a bee in her bonnet and she's like, well, I didn't know that. Not only was it in contract verbally, but then it was also in email writing. So that's just a little example. That's one that can build up buyer's confidence, but also reduce the amount of questions that clients send you or text you after or any time in the relationship. Oh yes, I'm so glad we have this in here. I was actually even thinking about this when I was working out earlier. I always hear people say, oh, I know my contract's ironclad. You will never hear me say that about anything that I've written or anybody else's, even the best lawyers that I've ever met in the world. Why? Because every circumstance is different. You simply cannot contract for every contingency in life. Now, we can contract for the most common things we see, the biggest pain points, etc. I don't want this to dissuade you from using contracts, but it should encourage you to understand your contracts, keep them up to date. I don't know if I have time to give an example on that one, because they're not a one and done. Not only is it changes in legalities, but it's changes in your business. I had a photographer, it was pre-pandemic, came to me, wedding photographer, who had gotten a contract drafted by a local lawyer, not local to me, but where they were. And it was all right. It was enough that I could work with, right? It's half a puzzle, so to speak. It was enough. And they were having an issue with their client, very specifically on the payment amount of the wedding. And why is because there was an issue is that in conversation, the photographer had quoted the couple X amount of dollars, but in contract, it was about $2,500 less. Why? Because she had never gone to update them, never gone to make sure that it was updated. Just put it into CRM and kept pumping it out. And it happens, you get busy. This is why I strongly suggest keeping in mind, one, they're not ironclad. And even if they are ironclad today, they may not be tomorrow because of changes in legalities. Two, you may have changes in your business. But three, I also want you, kind of back to what we were talking about before, is it a red flag if a client doesn't want to sign one, or if a client has questions about it? I want you to keep track of the questions that your clients ask you, right? Big or small. Why? Because you should be having your contract revisited at least on a yearly basis. I do this at the firm. I do a yearly legal audit for all of my clients, and we kind of go through and talk about these things because I can issue spot things that you're not necessarily going to think of. And we can make sure, did the pricing change? We update it. We can see, are there any changes in legalities? Like, for example, in the last few years, consumer data protection laws have been rolling out across the US. Many of y'all don't have an updated privacy policy, and you're in one of those states, you may not be in compliance, right? And so, yeah, for this one photographer with the wedding, the changes in the pricing, we were able to show that she had mentioned it in email, talked about it in the consultation, and the client ended up paying it in the end. However, what did that do? One, it cost the photographer having to come to me in order to, fix the whole situation. But two, I wouldn't say destroyed. What's the word I'm looking for? It diminished the buyer's confidence. So I'm pretty sure that client just got a little bad taste in the end. Now, it wasn't like it was a $20 difference. I said it's $2,500. Like, it was a good chunk. And it was a simple oversight. So just keep that in mind, right? Again, it might be ironclad today. It may not be ironclad tomorrow. You've got changes. So it's not a one and done. Don't use the term ironclad, but just keep in mind that as long as you stay up on it. Oh, that was the other thing I was going to say. Keeping the list of questions that your clients have, bring them to me. Like at the firm, we have a $99 a month retainer program with unlimited emails. So you can talk to me about anything and everything under the sun. I hear a lot of stuff that's not legal. That's okay. I enjoy it. And what you could do is say, hey, Susie's reached out to me and she's having a question about this clause. And, I've been getting a few of those recently. We can easily then massage it and get it cranked out. It may not be a full overdoing of the whole contract. It may just be one thing that's just not hitting right with clients, not because it's written poorly, just because the clients, they may have never engaged a professional photographer before, and we want to work with their psychology and we want to work to build their confidence.
Rachel, I missed a question
Yes.
when we were talking about contracts on the last slide. I think John is on the right track, but he asked, what do you mean by an entity in your checklist?
Oh, LLC or corporation.
Now, if you could really quickly say why that's important. I know that's a whole can of worms,
No,
but
it's a good question. Okay. So we talked about the three tools: contracts, entity, and insurance. Entity is setting up a business entity separate from yourself so that your personal and business assets are separated. Think of it like buckets. And the most common ones in the US are LLC or a corporation, whether it's a C Corp or an S Corp, that's a tax selection. It doesn't matter, LLC or corporation. But I want you to visualize right now, if you have not done any entity setup, so you've not gone to your state and set up an LLC or a corporation, you have one single bucket. I want you to put your house, your car, your earning potential, your retirement, your savings, your checking, everything. That's in one bucket. Now let's throw in all the business assets, because you don't have a separate entity. You only have one bucket. That one bucket is you right now. When you go and create an LLC or a corporation, you have a blue bucket and a red bucket. The blue bucket is going to hold all your personal stuff. The red bucket is going to hold all your business stuff. Why is that important? I visualize this as they're sitting in the sand, right? And you see a big wave coming, and you can only get up and you can only pick one up to save. In that wave is a client dispute or a lawsuit or an issue. Which are you going to want to try to gather first? Your personal stuff. You're like, oh, business, I got insurance, we'll take care of that. You want only for there to be contracts and issues and claims and potentials to be connected to that entity, that red bucket, an LLC or a corporation, so that your personal stuff you can pick up and run away down the beach, all you need. That's the way I visualize it. You want that separation, limited liability protection for you.
Yep. This opened up a couple other questions.
Oh gosh.
It's okay. Back to that other slide again, elements of a contract. Candy wanted to know legal activity. What do I have to do for this? Do I have to do something for this?
No,
sorry,
you just
Candy.
don't. I'm talking like, you can't contract to sell meth.
Oh, it has to be legal. Your activity has to be legal. Got it. Yes.
I mean, you could contract to sell meth, but good luck enforcing it.
All right. And then I'm going to try to read this as it's written because I don't really understand it. Like insurance companies, we can order a COI per event. Yep. Is there such lawyer service where we can order a well-formatted contract?
Yeah, TheLawTog.
Yeah, it seems like an obvious answer for me, but
TheLawTog is kind of the done for you or DIY. It is kind of done for you, but you don't get the benefit of being able to customize it with the lawyer. I've been in the industry long enough. We write it in such a way to combat all these major issues that we're seeing. But really, even at the end of the day, I said I'm the worst salesperson ever. Even at the end of the day, I still think a lawyer with the specifics that I outlined earlier is going to be your best bet. So I'm happy to do it. We do that. My firm does. But if you can find someone maybe local to you as well, as long as they're able to provide all the things that I mentioned.
Great. And we just put Amanda just put the link for TheLawTog.com into the chat. We also did have a chat question, a poll asking how many people are in an LLC. If anybody wants to answer that. And then I think we're all caught up on questions, Rachel. Thank you.
Well, and I'm sorry, I was just cranking through. I just got on my my warpath about contracts. I can't express to you all enough. Like I said, you don't have to come to me for it. I've just seen the benefits for you all, and I have felt the benefits for myself and all my businesses by having a good, solid contract. Yeah. So on the LLC side, one more point that I wanted to make on that, if you're going between the two, now mind you, one, I have never recommended for anyone to be less than an LLC, meaning right now, if you've not set up anything, you're a sole proprietor. You're one bucket. All your assets are in one bucket right now. Even with a good, solid insurance, I still don't suggest it, especially as somebody who just went through a house fire in the last year, and the amount of ways that insurance companies don't want to cover anything. I just, that's why I say those three tools, kind of like, think of it like a tripod. We're trying to hold up your business away from liability. So LLC is the most common one I see, especially for solo photographers. When I say solo, you might have second shooters, but you're not like employing a whole team. I kind of already went over the types earlier. We talked about the services contract. I've given that example throughout. Marketing ones, we talked about this, website terms and privacy policy. It's worth me mentioning again. I've thrown this little nugget out the whole time, but they're consumer data protection. And this started back in 2018 with actually GDPR over in the EU. And then it went to California, and then it has become even stricter in the US. It's creeping across. Why? Because we have all this advanced technology, especially with publicly accessible AI tools now. And consumers want to have their data protected. Now, mind you, this doesn't necessarily mean their financial data, their credit card. It literally can just be your Google Analytics that you have on your website. You're tracking their location, their demographics. You guys can go in Google Analytics and see all the different things. That if you're using Facebook pixels, Facebook and Instagram pixels for advertising, if you have a contact form with their name and phone number, even as a minimum, that's all consumer data that we need to make sure that we're in compliance of. Because here's the deal. I don't represent clients. I only represent businesses, primarily photographers. But if I was to be on the consumer side, so if I was to be on a client side to have a claim against one of you all, and I don't, but and it's just a breach of contract issue to begin with, I'm going to start looking at all the other things that you are doing. Why? Because I want to strategically leverage you into settlement. And there are consumer protection attorneys out there and civil attorneys. These are the people that your clients would be hiring. They're going to start looking around at, is your marketing in compliance? Is do you have security on your website? What are they doing for data protection? All of that. And these are the things that I tally up, and y'all's benefit when I represent you guys, to try to leverage the other party into settlement or dropping an issue. And it's going to happen to you if they have a good attorney on the other side. On the other piece of that, especially when it comes to this consumer data protection, marketing legalities, I keep using that term. That's because that's what we call our module in my legal course, Legally Legit. It goes over like FTC marketing requirements and all of that. There's been people who are like, oh, I'm small beans, I'll fly below the radar, and they get dinged. And it could be through the use of testimonials, disclosures, disclaimers, all that sort of stuff. So don't think just because you are a newer photographer or you've been doing this for so long, you get so complacent and comfortable, or that you don't think that you're that large that you may not get dinged, whether it's through an issue with a client or through the government doing their own circulation of figuring out things that are going on. Testimonial release forms. This is a big one, especially, it's very much like a model release. That model release is for, we already mentioned the likeness of the person in the photo. Same thing for testimonial. If you're partnering it with a photo of theirs and their name and location, etc., getting that testimonial release form is good to have. Disclaimers. Oh yeah, I already mentioned the hanging newborn photograph. Oh yeah, we talked about this with the second shooter. If intellectual property is involved, definitely should always have a contract. Let's use a different example here. Many of you probably have a logo for your business, and if you hired someone else, this makes me chuckle. If you hired a third-party company or person, go back and look at your terms, because right now, if they did not sign over the rights to that logo, to you for your use. Right now, it's probably just an implied license of use, or just maybe just a one-liner. A license is just permission. It's not ownership. What does that mean? That graphic designer, logo designer could stop you from using the logo at any time, which you're using to, develop brand identity. You cannot go and trademark it. And it's so incredible to me. And I've actually been making it my mission to talk more and more to graphic designers and branding and marketing agencies about this piece, because y'all will go get a logo created. You come to me, we go to do the trademark application. Well, it says on there in the application, you have to attest that you have all the ownership rights in the logo that you're uploading under penalty of perjury. I don't know about y'all. I don't look good in like bright orange suit. I am not going, just kidding. But really, I'm not going to commit perjury. I'm not going to have you all commit perjury. So we reverse engineer it. We go look at the terms. Did that logo designer ever sign over the logo? Majority of them are not doing it. It's to the point that I'm now facilitating and educating these design companies on behalf of y'all when you have a logo that you want to get trademarked, because they have no idea about this. They're like, oh no, but I'm letting them have it. I'm like, but how? We have to have it in writing. And that's especially true if we go to copyright register the logo. Little quick differentiation: copyright protects the creative work, trademark protects it as a source indicator for a product or service. Just a little distinction, but you can do both for your logo. And so same thing there. The Copyright Office will actually ask who created it, and they want to see the terms of assignment between the logo designer to you.
Again, something else that I've learned today. Thank you so much. Dawn has an excellent question. If the graphic designer is part of your company, does that matter? If the graphic designer was an employee, does that affect the ownership rights?
Does. Go back to what we talked about with the second shooter earlier. The only two ways that you don't necessarily have to have, the only two ways that you can get it is either they're classified and treated as a W-2 employee, or a written agreement if they're a 1099 contractor. However, I will still tell you, I require all of my W-2 employees, and I advise all my clients this too, to have it in their standard employment agreements, and this is the way we sell it on TheLawTog, have it in their standard employment agreements that they sign it over, because we don't ever want there to be any question. Because if we ever had to go to litigate it, it's going to take a lot more resources to prove employment classification, et cetera. And it's going to be a lot easier for me just to hold up a document and go, see, look, you agreed. So yes, we can work with them being a W-2 and it being yours. However, I still suggest having the things signed over.
I have another question, and actually, I might need a little clarification on this, but Jenna asked if the client willingly puts a testimonial on our Facebook business profile or Google business profile or Facebook page, it's automatically accessible to the public. Do we need them to sign a testimonial release to use it elsewhere?
Yes, not for on there. So let's say you screen capped it. Say they put it on Google reviews, you screen capped it to go put it elsewhere. I would suggest one.
Perfect.
Yep. Let's see. Other things, outsourcing, we talked about this before, whether it's employee or contractor. And I'm actually shocked I don't have it on this. I did have it on the previous slide. I should have a bullet point on here. Services contract, like we talked about, whether it's employee or it's a subcontractor. Non-solicitation. Oh, shoot. Kelly, we have an error on the slide. We have the non-compete stuff, which that's a little asterisk on this. So it's not really truly an error. Let me get to that in a second. Non-solicitation is a big one, especially if you are having another photographer coming in to help you in your business. Say, for a while I had another photographer who was doing all my intake and management. Everything was fine with her. It was all fine and dandy. But I have seen situations where either gave you the second shooter example earlier, where they were soliciting the client and sold the prints to the wedding client, or if they are helping you as an assistant and they're getting the data of the clients or lead data, you want them to not be able to solicit for their own gain outside of your business, for their own business. Non-competes, we need to put an asterisk. That's the error I'm talking about. So you guys probably saw FTC has come out, and there's already been a whole wave of courts and everything not looking highly upon non-competes. They've been very difficult to enforce in past years, and they're typically, actually they were only applicable to employees. the whole point of being a contractor is being able to freely independently contract. That's why you call it independent contractor. The asterisk on here though is that we have a ruling from the FTC, but we're going to start seeing other accompanying legislation that comes out and laws about it. So right now, the general idea is that no non-competes are going to be enforceable except for key executive employees that were already entered into one prior to the new decision. However, again, I put the asterisks on there because we're not in a solid position right now to give a final determining factor, and this is probably going to be state specific. But I will say, they're hard to do anyways, even without this new FTC stuff that came out. Having a non-compete had to be so narrowly tailored anyways, and you can't go open a photography business anywhere in the whole world forever, right? It has to be very narrowly tailored to the actions, the timeline, location, etc. And then confidentiality is a big document. And why these are important, here's the thing. For confidentiality and non-solicitation specifically, if you don't have these documents in place and this behavior happens, you go to court and you go, but Judge, Susie, my assistant, went and shared my proprietary confidential information for her gain out in the community, out in the industry. Judge is going to go, well, what did you do to safeguard it? Oh, well, I told her this, I told her that. Judge can say, well, did you have her sign anything? Think of it like a gate, right? It's a gate to that information, that stopping the solicitation, the gate to the release of the information, because then it puts into a breach of contract situation. The little asterisks on this one when you get into the consumer data protection piece, but I'm talking very specifically, just keep in mind, these are legal tools that you want to have, contracts you want to have in place, whether employee or contractor, to safeguard client data, proprietary information, and also keeping your worker, I put worker because it can be employee or contractor, from soliciting your clients. Do we have any questions on that piece before I move on? No? Okay. How to sign. Best practice for signing. Now, these are not necessarily legal, right? I mean, we talked about, like on bullet point 2, exchange of value. It does the consideration piece. Typically, it's money for photos. It could be contracts for photos. It could be house cleaning for photos, right? You can do any sort of exchange of value. So what does it say that you, the photographer, will be given, and what will you provide? The third one, we talked about capacity earlier. Cannot force someone to sign or bully them. So no duress or undue influence, have to have the capacity. Go back to bullet point number 1. This is just more of a practical application. Can both parties easily sign? That's a good best practice. That I tell you what, you send me a PDF that I have to print off, go to my printer, get out the paper, find out that my ink is out, go down to Target, pick up my ink. I get back, realize I got the wrong ink, have to go back. You think I'm ever going to hire you? No, make it easy as possible for your clients. Digital signatures. But with us doing that, we need to make sure that it is known that this is a contract, because we have to make sure we have that overt offer and acceptance. So you can't take these contract terms and nestle them into like a questionnaire and call it like pre-wedding questionnaire. Like, you want to make it known that it's a contract. You cannot trick them. You cannot mistake or sign without knowledge, or else we don't have the actual meeting of the minds. The contract, even though it may be executed, you did not reach the level that we talked about a couple slides back of what qualifies for a contract. And I've already mentioned about digital contracts are legal. We have the e-sign Act, legalized electronic signatures, and there's so many free systems out there that you can use. Why not? And again, I'm not going to go and have to hunt down ink and paper in order to print it off. Oh, and then scan it. Then the printer doesn't load, so I have to do the printer driver, whole thing, right? So no, we're not doing that to our clients. That's
Rachel, I'm going to interrupt just for a second.
Yes.
I know we're at the top of the hour. Amanda looks like she has something to say. Maybe I also, okay. I had a question. People who do senior photos, who's signing those contracts for this high school seniors who are under 18?
Parents or legal guardian.
Right.
A minor can, but it's voidable only from their side. So what's the point? Well, generally speaking, depends on the state. So I should give my little fine print there. Generally speaking. Okay. Yeah, we did not get through all of this. We didn't get to the AI stuff. That's okay. One other last thing that I do want to, two main last points I want to make. How do you cancel or void a contract? I see people rush to say, I got to get a cancellation of contract document. Take a pause, take a breath, and look in your existing services contract and see if there is a section that already says, how do you cancel one, right? That's going to control and dictate. If not, then a cancellation contract could be a good one to have. And then, is there a cooling off period? This is, you can Google about this, FTC cooling off, amount of time that your client has to cancel the executed contract without penalty. These rules were put in place more so when it was door-to-door salesmen or you're signing contracts at a trade show or expo. So unless you're doing those, generally speaking, there's going to be no cooling off period, because anytime there's been pre-negotiations or it's done at your place of business, and pre-negotiations could be the inquiry, talking about getting to the session, then signing. That is, you're not blindsiding the client with the contract. It's not a high pressure sales situation the way that door-to-door salesmen were, or being on a trade show floor. So just think, if you're doing in like the normal course of pre-negotiations or it's executed at your place of business, there's probably not going to be a cooling off period. Check with your state. But if you're doing door-to-door, don't think you're going door-to-door to do sessions, but who knows? Maybe in pandemic, but when you did like front porch sessions. But anyhow, but definitely at like trade shows or expos, there will more than likely be a cooling off period. All right. So I know, sorry guys, really long-winded, but contracts I just get really passionate about. Maybe we'll see if we can circle around and do the AI piece later. I really did not expect to go that long. Is there any other questions for now? If not, though, keep in mind you can always reach out to info@TheLawTog.com, or if you go to the TheLawTog, we have a contact form, chat bubble. You can go into the group. Like, there is no exhaustive amount of ways to get a hold of us.
Rachel, since we didn't make it through the whole deck, will we be able to provide the deck in the
Probably
email?
could. I mean, my only concern with that would be maybe it might be better for me just to self-record that portion. We'd have to look at that, because as you can see, the way that I talk, not everything I'm
Right.
saying
There's
is
not
on the
enough
slide.
information there. Yeah. So I'm going to guess with the AI, one of the basic points you're going to make is the same of trash in, trash out.
And the protection of consumers. And I kind of already threw that in earlier, just in case we didn't get to the end. I'm not against AI. I use it. I love it. I do not use it for anything that it's going to have consumer data in there, not just because I'm a lawyer, but because of all these consumer data laws. So I can create it, but I'm going to be a lot more general, like, write me a reply to a photography client that has an issue with X, Y, and Z, right? I'm not going to include their name. I'm not going to do all that. It'll give me the blanks. I can fill that in for myself. For my, more likely the questions are going to be around the use of editing and culling and things like that. You always just need to look at the terms of the tool that you're using. And if you're going to use it, because many of these tools, how does AI learn? It learns through data. Where is it getting data? From other sources. Not all tools are that way. Some are limited, but many out there, especially the ones that are free or cheap, are tapping in and they're pushing out what would be your client's likeness and everything out into the interwebs. And so it can learn, because that's the value of AI, is that it has to keep learning. In order to do that, it has to have more data. And so I would start with looking at the terms of service for the AI tool that you're using, limit what you're going to upload into it. But if you're going to do it for like photo editing, where your client is recognizable, right? Their likeness and all of that, make sure you have it in the contract. And we have this at the TheLawTog. We have a very specific AI, what's the word that I'm looking for? Anyways, the client gives permission to the photographer that it's okay for you to use AI with the photos. Because again, even though you're the copyright owner, they still own the likeness and the rights to that, the publicity rights that the client has that's in the photo.
Great. Well, thank you again. We got another request for the slides, just because I think maybe, we'll have the recording for anything we went over. You'll see those slides. And then I understand that the rest of the slides probably don't have enough information to support, just handing out the slides alone. I'd love to do a part 2 on this, Rachel, and get some more information on AI. Also, contact information for the TheLawTog for Rachel's group is on the screen. You said you also have a TheLawTog group. Is that a Facebook group?
Yes, Facebook group.
Is that paid or anybody can join?
Oh, anybody can join. Yep.
Great. So if you do think of a question after this, I think that's probably a great place to go too. Thank you, everybody, for joining. Thank you, Rachel, for your time and your expertise. Thanks, Amanda, for helping out in the chat. And I hope everybody has a great day.